Mark and Linda Waverly thought they were simply exploring new boundaries. Travis and Rachel Carlson believed they were just having a little fun. But when attraction turned to obsession and fantasy gave way to manipulation, one of them crossed a line that could never be undone. What started as an agreement between two couples ended in a storm of betrayal, stalking, and a brutal murder no one saw coming. Mark and Linda Waverly lived on a cul-de-sac in a quiet Michigan suburb, the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes until sunset and everyone waved as they passed. They had been married for 14 years, childless by choice, and focused on building a comfortable life. Mark was a systems analyst, the kind of man who appreciated structure and predictability. Linda, more outgoing and creative, ran a small home bakery that had become popular among local families. They were well-liked, dependable, and polite, but if anyone had looked closer, they would have noticed the distance that had quietly grown between them over the years. Just 3 streets away lived Travis and Rachel Carlson. They were younger than the Waverleys by a few years, married for 9, and parents to a 6-year-old girl who spent weekends with Rachel's mother. Travis owned a modest but successful gym and prided himself on discipline and strength. Rachel worked long shifts as a nurse at the local hospital. Their life seemed busy but manageable, filled with the kind of quiet stress that comes from balancing parenting, finances, and long hours. Outwardly, both couples looked content. Neither seemed the type to invite chaos into their lives. But underneath the surface, things were shifting. The Waverleys and Carlsons first met at a neighborhood cookout hosted by a mutual friend. It started with casual conversation over grilled burgers and sweet tea. Linda complimented Rachel on her earrings, and the two quickly bonded over shared tastes in baking and fitness. Mark and Travis talked about sports and home improvement projects. By the end of the evening, they exchanged numbers and agreed to meet again. The friendships developed easily. Dinners turned into wine nights, and before long, the couples began spending time together almost every weekend. It was during one of those late-night gatherings, after too many drinks and with laughter echoing into the early hours, that someone brought up the topic of open marriages. No one remembers exactly who said it first. Maybe it was Travis, joking about spicing things up, or maybe it was Linda, laughing a little too freely. But once the idea was out there, it hung in the air like electricity. The conversation turned bolder, flirtier, and then, slowly, more serious. At first, it was just talk, a fantasy. But fantasy has a way of creeping into reality when boundaries blur. The four of them discussed rules. No emotions, equal participation, total honesty. They agreed it would only happen occasionally, and only with each other. One night turned into a weekend. A weekend became a pattern. Soon, what began as an experiment became part of their lives. In the beginning, it felt exhilarating. There was no secrecy, no guilt. Everyone agreed. It was controlled, exciting, and, strangely, it brought new energy to the couple's original relationships. Mark and Linda were more affectionate. Travis and Rachel seemed more relaxed. It was like they had found a loophole, pleasure without consequence. But the feeling didn't last. Small things started to change. Travis began texting Linda during the day just to say hi. He started lingering after the others had left, claiming he forgot something. He offered to help her with errands, stopped by her bakery unannounced, and started giving her gifts: a bracelet, a book she mentioned once, her favorite coffee. Linda laughed it off, calling him overattentive. She didn't tell Mark. She didn't want to make it weird, but it was already getting weird. Meanwhile, Rachel started noticing Travis's absence. He had always worked long hours, but now he was unreachable for stretches of time. He'd come home late, irritated and defensive when she asked where he'd been. He claimed she was overreacting. Mark didn't see any of it. He was buried in work and still trying to repair whatever cracks had formed in his marriage. For a while, he believed they were okay, better, even. But what none of them realized was that the arrangement had shifted from mutual exploration to something dangerous. The neighborhood remained unaware. To the outside world, these were just two happy, well-adjusted couples living the American dream. But behind closed doors, a new version of the truth was forming, one that had little to do with fantasy and everything to do with control, desire, and the slow, creeping edge of obsession. What started as a thrill was quietly becoming a threat, and no one saw it coming. Travis Carlson had always been a man of confidence. He thrived on order, control, and routine. But something about Linda Waverly disrupted all that. At first, it was simple attraction, a natural result of their new arrangement. But it didn't take long for Travis to start seeing Linda as more than just a partner in a temporary experiment. He began to crave her attention, her laugh, her presence. The more she pulled away, the harder he pushed. It started with texts, lighthearted. Messages about their last weekend together, inside jokes, song recommendations. Linda responded politely, but kept things short. She told herself it was just a phase, something that would burn out on its own. But when the texts became daily, then multiple times a day, she started to worry. Travis would send photos of where he was, ask where she was, even suggest they meet alone. Linda never agreed. She told him gently but firmly that their agreement had boundaries, and those boundaries mattered. Travis didn't take the hint. When the text stopped working, he started showing up. At her bakery, he'd appear during slow hours, pretending to need coffee or baked goods. He'd compliment her dress, lean too close, ask about her day in a way that felt invasive. She told Mark that business was picking up and she was feeling tired. She didn't mention Travis. She didn't want to cause conflict or create drama. After all, it was all supposed to be harmless. Meanwhile, Rachel Carlson had been watching her husband change. Travis had always been intense, but now he was distracted, impatient, and secretive. He stayed out late with vague excuses, claiming he had to meet new clients or handle late gym repairs. He often came home long after their daughter was asleep and avoided eye contact when Rachel asked questions. The warmth between them had cooled. Conversations were short, and affection disappeared without explanation. She felt like she was losing him, piece by piece, and she didn't know why. Then one evening, Rachel decided to follow him. He had said he was meeting a potential investor at a coffee shop. He left at 7:45 p.m. She waited 10 minutes, got in her car, and followed at a distance. Instead of turning toward downtown, Travis drove to the Waverly Street. Rachel parked a few houses down and watched as he pulled into their driveway. The house was dark except for a kitchen light. He didn't knock. He used a key. Rachel waited over an hour. At 10:12 p.m., Travis finally emerged. He didn't look around. He walked straight to his car, expression unreadable, and drove off. Rachel stayed parked, staring at the empty house, her mind racing with possibilities. She didn't go home right away. She drove in circles for almost an hour, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. The man she had built a life with had crossed a line. She just didn't know how far. Back at the Waverlys, Mark had no idea any of this was happening. Linda had asked him to spend the night at a friend's place, claiming she needed space. To think, Mark, still feeling guilty over the emotional distance in their marriage, agreed without protest. He didn't know that Travis had used that opportunity to insert himself into Linda's space. He didn't know that Linda had refused him again that night, telling him it was over, that it had all gone too far. What he also didn't know was that Travis had become incapable of hearing the word no. The following morning, Linda tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. She went to work, smiled at customers, baked cupcakes and pies. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Travis didn't come by, but she found a note tucked under her car windshield. It simply read, "You're making a mistake." No name, no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. That night, Mark came home to find an envelope on their doorstep. Inside were photos, grainy, taken at close range, of Linda and Travis in bed. Mark stared at them in silence. There was no explanation, just undeniable proof of what had taken place. Linda returned home minutes later to find him standing there, photos in hand, eyes full of betrayal. She admitted to everything: the affair, the agreement, the mistake. But she left out one critical truth. Travis was stalking her, and she was scared Diane trying to avoid conflict. Linda had invited danger. What had started as consent had turned into coercion, and she was now trapped between her husband's rage and her former lover's obsession. No one had any idea how close the situation was to exploding, but the pieces were already in place. All it needed was a single spark. Linda Waverly spent the next few days in a state of constant unease. Every sound outside made her jump. She double-checked locks, peeked through windows, and barely slept. Travis wasn't just infatuated, he was obsessed. She had underestimated how far he would go to insert himself into her life. The note on her windshield hadn't been a one-time message. More began to appear. One was taped to the bakery's back door early in the morning. Another was tucked into the return slot at the public library where she sometimes dropped off books. Each note was brief, vague, but threatening in its own quiet way. You said you felt it too. We don't have to hide. This doesn't end unless we're honest. She considered going to the police, but didn't think they would take her seriously. There was no explicit threat, no violence, just an uncomfortable persistence. Mark, meanwhile, had moved back into the house after a few nights away. He was cold, distant, and barely spoke to Linda. She understood why. The affair had broken something between them, and she was no longer sure it could be repaired. Mark focused on work, stayed late at the office, and slept on the guest room couch. The silence between them became its own kind of prison. Travis continued to spiral. When Linda blocked his number, he started using anonymous texting apps. She changed her phone number, and somehow he found the new one. He left voicemail messages under different names. She recognized his voice instantly, each time sounding more desperate. "Why are you acting like this?" didn't mean anything. "I know you're just scared. You'll feel better once we talk face to face." Linda stopped answering entirely. She hoped silence would push him away, but it only seemed to encourage him. One afternoon, she returned home from a grocery run and found her front door slightly open. Nothing appeared stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. But a coffee mug that usually sat in the cabinet was placed neatly on the kitchen counter. A chilling message was scrawled on a napkin next to it. "You still drink it black, right?" Linda locked herself in the bathroom and called Mark. For the first time, she told him everything: Travis's stalking, the notes, the messages, the mug, the break-in. Mark listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stayed silent for several long seconds before saying, "You should have told me sooner." That evening, Mark installed a security camera over the front door and changed every lock. He stayed in the house with Linda, sleeping on the living room floor with a baseball bat beside him. The tension between them was still thick, but there was now a shared fear keeping them tethered together. It was no longer about the affair. It was about survival. Rachel Carlson had also begun piecing things together. Travis had grown even more erratic. He skipped their daughter's school play, missed dinner 2 nights in a row, and seemed constantly on edge. One night, she found him in their garage at midnight, sitting in his car with the engine off and the lights out. When she knocked on the window, he jumped like he'd been caught doing something illegal. He said he was just thinking. She didn't press further. But later, while doing laundry, she found a wrinkled piece of paper in the pocket of one of his hoodies, a printed photo of Linda, walking alone in a parking lot, clearly taken from a distance. Rachel sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the photo. She hadn't told anyone what she'd seen the night she followed Travis to the Waverly's house. She had hoped it was just one final mistake, something she could pretend didn't matter. But the evidence was too strong. Whatever had happened between Travis and Linda wasn't over. It was consuming him, and now it was threatening to consume everyone else 2.3 nights later. Mark's new security camera recorded someone moving around the side of the house just after 11 p.m. The footage was grainy, but it clearly showed a tall man in a hoodie circling the home, checking the windows, and finally disappearing into the darkness. Mark called the police and filed a report. Officers took the footage but said there wasn't enough to make an arrest. No face, no name, just suspicion. But the threat was no longer just emotional. It was physical, creeping into their home, their routines, their lives. Linda slept with a flashlight under her pillow. Mark kept his keys in his pocket, even at home. Rachel kept her daughter away from Travis and began considering a restraining order. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it, the growing weight of something terrible closing in. They were past the point of fixing anything. The question now was how much worse it would get before someone truly got hurt. The storm came without warning. The forecast had only predicted light rain, but by late evening, thunder rolled over the neighborhood and the skies opened up. Linda Waverly had just closed her bakery early, hoping to get home before the downpour started. She parked the car in the driveway and rushed inside, locking the door behind her. The windows rattled in the wind. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m. Mark had texted earlier that he would be working late, and she hadn't heard from him since. Alone in the house, she tried to distract herself by organizing invoices and wiping down the kitchen counters, but her nerves were already frayed. The power flickered once, then went out completely. The entire block seemed to go dark. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the sound of rain hitting the windows and wind howling outside. Linda lit a candle and placed it on the kitchen island. Her phone had only 12% battery left. She considered calling Mark, but stopped herself. He would either be on his way home or not, and either way, she didn't want to seem panicked. Instead, she turned on the flashlight app and began checking the house. Windows locked, back door secure, blinds pulled down. But something didn't feel right. She stood near the back door and listened. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain. Then, barely audible, the crunch of wet leaves. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the side of the house. Her heart pounded in her ears. She took a step back, holding the flashlight like a weapon. Even though she knew it wouldn't help, the loud thud came from the back of the house. Then the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Linda didn't scream. She ran, down the hall, past the dining room, toward the stairs, but before she could reach them, a shadow moved in the darkness. Someone was inside. A figure, tall and hooded, stepped out from the kitchen, and in his hand was a tire iron. The candle on the island flickered. Behind him, revealing just enough of his face, it was Travis. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Linda turned and tried to run, but he was faster. The next moments were a blur of chaos, shouting, the sound of something breaking, the dull thud of metal against wood. The struggle moved through the hallway, into the living room. A vase shattered. Furniture toppled. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. When the police arrived, the scene was grim. A neighbor had called 911 after hearing shouting and what sounded like a crash. Officers found the front door ajar. Inside, Linda Waverly lay unresponsive on the living room floor. Blood pooled beneath her head, and a cracked fireplace poker lay nearby. The paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene. Mark Waverly was located the next morning at a hotel 15 miles away. Security footage showed him checking in at 8:35 p.m. and ordering food around 9 p.m. When detectives told him about Linda, he collapsed in disbelief. He gave them everything: his phone, his car keys, his statement. But the damage had already been done. He was the husband, the betrayed spouse. He had motive. The police didn't care about alibis until they ruled him out completely. He was arrested that afternoon. The story moved quickly through local media. Jealous husband kills. Wife in stormy confrontation. Reporters camped outside the bakery and the Waverly home. Friends, neighbors, and customers were shocked. None could believe Mark was capable of violence. But photos from the affair, found in the couple's home, painted a different picture. A story of betrayal, obsession, and possible revenge. Meanwhile, Travis Carlson was nowhere to be found. Rachel told police that Travis had left the house the night before, claiming he needed to clear his head. He hadn't returned since. She gave them everything she knew about the affair, about his stalking behavior, about the photos she had found. Investigators took her seriously. A warrant was issued. Forensics were pulled from Linda's home, and security footage from the house revealed the truth. At exactly 11:13 p.m., a figure in a hoodie was captured circling the property. Though the footage was blurry, the build and gait matched Travis. It was enough for authorities to focus their search. His car was found abandoned in a parking garage downtown. Inside, they found a backpack with gloves, rope, and one of Linda's bakery aprons, bloodstained. Mark was released that evening. He returned to a home that no longer felt like his own, where every corner held memories that now carried a darker shadow. The town remained silent, stunned that something so violent could erupt from lives that once seemed so normal. But there was still one unanswered question. Where had Travis gone, and how far would he go to escape justice? Travis Carlson's face was now plastered across every news station in Michigan. The man once known as a local gym owner and friendly neighbor was now a fugitive, accused of brutally murdering Linda Waverly in a violent, premeditated attack. His disappearance sparked a multi-county manhunt. Police set up checkpoints, distributed flyers, and followed dozens of tips that led nowhere. Every lead brought only more questions. He had vanished completely. Rachel Carlson, left behind in the eye of the storm, did her best to shield her daughter from the growing chaos. She barely slept, replaying every conversation, every strange moment, wondering how long Travis had been slipping away from reality. The man she married was gone, replaced by someone consumed by delusion and control. Rachel cooperated with investigators, handed over his phone records, emails, even his gym computer. Hidden in a folder labeled Membership Docs, detectives found a disturbing collection of documents. Photos of Linda taken without her knowledge, screenshots of her social media posts, printouts of emails between her and Mark. Travis had been monitoring her life for months. 2 days later, police found a break in the case. Surveillance footage from a gas station in northern Indiana showed Travis purchasing food, gas, and what appeared to be hair dye and a disposable phone. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and kept his head down, but investigators were confident. It was him. He was trying to change his appearance and run. A regional alert was issued. Authorities believed he was heading west. The U.S. Marshals joined the search, and the case received national attention. But Travis remained a step ahead. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. The story faded from the headlines, but the damage was permanent. Mark Waverly sold the bakery, unable to bear the reminders of Linda. He moved away quietly, leaving behind the life he had built with her. Friends said he was never the same after her death, quieter, withdrawn, a man carrying weight that couldn't be seen. Rachel filed for divorce and moved in with her sister out of state. She wanted no ties to Travis, no connection to the man who had shattered multiple lives with one act of obsession. She gave a single interview to a local reporter, saying only, "I didn't know the man he became. I don't think he knew either." Then, 5 months after Linda's murder, Travis was finally found that he had been living under an alias in a small town in South Dakota, working part-time at a mechanic shop and sleeping in a rented trailer behind the building. A tip came from the shop owner, who saw a news segment on unsolved crimes and recognized Travis's photo. Marshals arrested him without incident. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He just nodded when they called his name. Back in Michigan, prosecutors moved quickly. Travis was charged with first-degree murder, breaking and entering, and aggravated stalking. In court, he appeared calm, even composed. The prosecution laid out the evidence, the hidden photos, the text messages, the threatening notes, the fingerprints on the tire iron found in the living room. The security footage sealed it. There was no room for doubt. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even in prison, Travis never admitted guilt. He claimed he loved Linda, that she had promised to leave Mark, that everything had been misunderstood. He called the murder an accident born of emotion. No one believed him. Not the jury, not the judge, not the families left in ruins. The Waverly home sat empty for over a year before being sold quietly to a developer. The bakery closed permanently. Some neighbors moved away. Others stayed but never forgot what happened. A bench was placed at the local park with Linda's name etched into a bronze plaque. Fresh flowers appeared on it every week, though no one ever saw who left them. What began as a shared experiment, a flirtation with danger disguised as freedom, ended with shattered trust, ruined lives, and irreversible loss. Behind closed doors, fantasies had festered into obsession, and obsession had become a weapon. Travis Carlson didn't just kill Linda. He destroyed everything around her. And in the quiet aftermath, those who survived were left to rebuild forever, haunted by the simple truth that one decision, one blurred boundary, had opened the door to something far more dangerous than any of them ever imagined.